Hey everybody, Paul Chin Jr. here. Welcome to Talking Serverless, where we're supposed to talk about serverless. Today, we want to welcome Danielle, a recently minted AWS Hero. And, we brought her on today because of her deep industry experience. She worked at a startup that got acquired by AWS. That's so exciting. But even more importantly, Danielle's just a really great human being, passionate about helping others find success in the cloud. And so, with that, Danielle, welcome to the show.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is awesome. It was great because we got to connect, face to face for just like a few glancing blows at the serverless party and at reInvent. It was so good to catch up with you then and bring you on the podcast today. We talked a little bit, before about what we were going to chat about, and I thought that your experience in how you've changed careers and grown in this industry to be super fascinating, and definitely want to share it with the rest of the community. So let's start off by having you kind of introduce, how you got started in programming.
Yeah, glad to do so. It's a little bit of a windy road for me, but the best stories are that way. So I started off my adult career as a music teacher. I taught kindergarten through eighth grade, and I really love my students. I really love the teaching part, but just kind of the higher level, how public school systems work in this country. I felt like I wasn't able to have the level of impact that I really wanted to have. So I got burnt out real fast and decided to quit for my mental health. And I'm still a very big advocate for music education, public schools. I feel like I've been able to have a bigger impact from the outside. But anyway, from there, I needed to pay my bills, as you do. So I took the first job that I was able to get that I was qualified for. And serendipitously, it was tech support. So from tech support, I realized as I kind of crawled up the ranks, like as, a more senior person that interacted with customers, I started being the go-between of customer feedback to engineering. And then through my interactions with engineering, similar theme. A lot of times I would pass off feature requests or bugs to engineers. And then, just for whatever reason, they were not addressed. No shade to those engineers, of course, but it was just a theme that I saw. And I wanted to take matters into my own hands and be able to have a bigger impact to provide a better customer support kind of feedback mechanism there. So
You decided to get your hands dirty.
yeah, taught myself how to code. I used Free Code Camp. Major shout out to them. HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And then from there, I really wanted to speed up my learning so I could get a job for real. So I went to a code school. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and there's a lot of code schools here. So shout out to Alchemy Code Lab. Unfortunately, they had to shut down this year, but they were fantastic in helping me get to where I am now.
That's awesome. In general, I also started very similarly. I didn't have any formal background or training, and I just started with Free Code Camp and Codecademy and a bunch of tutorials and YouTube. I think we both started around the same time, 2015, 2016, somewhere in there. At first, front end development is really engaging because you get to see things. There's an actual UI. But because it's tech and it never kind of stops changing, what have you been seeing about the changes to front end engineering and how that kind of shifts towards back end and cloud?
Yeah, good question. Well, when I started in code school, they taught us Angular. I think they call it Angular JS now, before Angular 2 came out. We also had to learn a lot about Webpack and kind of the ins and outs of how to set that up. And a trend that I'm kind of seeing now as an occasional tourist in front end land is it seems like there's a lot more focus on like built-in things that do the Webpack config for you, like stuff like Vite. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but stuff like that. There also seems to be a really big emphasis on React and React frameworks. So, like a framework for your library, um, which is weird to me, but I get it.
Yeah. The front end landscape, I think the running joke is like every week there's a new framework, people get tired of it, but the reality of tech is that it never stops changing. And what I find fascinating about front end development is that there are companies now like Vercel and then even Deno Deploy who take what JavaScript engineers kind of already know and then sneakily put them and turn them into backend engineers, by being able to have all the tools up front and bundling everything and deploying on just one command. And so, could you tell me a bit about what you've seen happen over the years as front end and back end start to meld together?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting time and also a fantastic time to be a web developer in general. Because I've definitely noticed a trend from, when I first started, I was primarily front end, and it's like I would be waiting for a back end engineer to build some API endpoint that I needed to finish a form. And like more and more, I'm seeing things are melding together a little more in terms of responsibilities, in terms of how we deploy things. Another trend that I'm noticing too is a lot of people seem to like type safety a lot, which I agree with. And that can be really helpful with, that contract between the front end and the back end, like lots of people using GraphQL and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely bleeding together, but I'm here for it.
How have you evolved your skill set in order to take advantage of these more like back end shifting opportunities?
It was kind of slow, and I didn't realize it until looking back on it. Very gradual. So, like, starting out as, strictly front end, like, this is all I know. I barely know anything about databases. But, like, more and more, I just found myself curious about, how to build something from front to back and not needing to be reliant on that other back-end engineer, and or if there was a bug in the integration between front end and back end, like kind of sticking my fingers in there and troubleshooting it a little bit. And I will say, shout out to serverless for that, because that is definitely really sped up my evolution to being more of a back end oriented person. So
Yeah, that's awesome to hear because I think serverless is the really good entry point for someone who's already doing some front end work to start getting into databases, start getting into the APIs that they're using and having more control over the whole deployment process. Over the last, I don't know, probably like 6 or 7 years of the different companies that you've been with, have you seen organizational shifts or organizational trends as far as it goes? Like there's the app dev team and then there's the DevOps team, or there's the front end engineer and the back end engineer. What have you seen out there?
yeah, totally. My situation is very specialized because I'm only speaking from like early stage startup viewpoint. So other people's experiences may be different, but yeah, starting out, my very first job was all Docker ECS based. It was before Fargate was even a thing. So we used EC2. And yeah, as a front end engineer, like I just kind of had to kind of do what everyone does when they first learn Git. It's like you learn three commands and you know enough to be dangerous. That's what I did with Docker. But like moving on, I noticed like that company was more and more like kind of starting cron jobs with Lambda, and also gradually moving from, lovingly ClickOps created AWS, um, integrations to using things like CloudFormation. My more recent jobs seem to use CDK more, and definitely shout out to CDK. There's definitely some detractors out there that I think there are valid concerns and complaints, but I think CDK is really great, especially talking in terms of like how we can get more people involved in infrastructure. Writing TypeScript instead of YAML, for example, can be really helpful for getting a front end engineer on board to help you out.
Yeah, definitely. I get asked, all the time, which infrastructure as code do you use? And I just say yes, like just use one. Like, so often people get caught up in, what's the perfect tool to use rather than just getting started in one and seeing how it goes and doing your due diligence to really try them all out. It's interesting with your background because you had some experience dealing directly with infrastructure as code as kind of like as a service. Could you tell us a bit about what that was like and what you really learned and took away from that?
Yeah, totally. At my prior company, Stackery, that got acquired by AWS and was relaunched as Application Composer, it was kind of meta because we relied on AWS SAM a lot, and AWS SAM is just a superset of CloudFormation. But like our end users were dragging and dropping those resources on the canvas. But behind the scenes, we had this library where we were taking, they called them facets, like all the different potential changes you could make to a resource. And we were synthesizing it into a CloudFormation stack that was deployable. And yeah, it was definitely very meta, especially because like our goal was to help people be able to deploy things without having to write any YAML or very much YAML. But behind the scenes, we had to be experts on how to write CloudFormation. So I learned a lot in that job, and it was very transferable because when CDK became more popular, when I got a job that was Terraform, I feel like if you learn one IAC framework really well, picking up the others is very easy, especially if you're staying on the same cloud, which was my case.
Yeah, I I really appreciate and love the folks out there that are doing multi-cloud. I think that it's good for the industry for all the clouds to, compete with one another. And even though at Serverless Guru we focus directly on AWS because that's where we can really build an expertise. I do want these tools to be able to handle other clouds because that's the only way as an industry will really be able to continue growing and pushing and making things better. What I find interesting about a tool that will sort of take ClickOps and then turn it into infrastructure as code, but only through a visual drag and drop tool. It's kind of an interesting abstraction. How did people feel about going from just using the console to now using this tool, but it also has IAC in the middle? Like, what was that like?
Well, at the time, I think this was like 2017. So we were actually still educating people a lot on what serverless even was. And to a degree, even like over explaining, like, no, 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 like functions are part of it, but it's a lot more than that. So I feel like that was probably from my personal standpoint. I can't speak for other people that were at the company, but that seemed to be the biggest challenge. But like the story of hypothetically, if Stackery goes belly up and we have all of our stuff on it, we had a really great eject story because it did generate deployable AWS SAM. So like that part was super easy.
Ah, I see. Yeah, I think for folks that are coming in and learning about infrastructure as code from the beginning, that example of being able to kind of standardize the middleware of what you want to do with what needs to go into the cloud by using code, by using YAML and structured data to be able to handle that. I think it really shows how resilient these cloud architectures can be as things change over time. So with that, How do you think front end developers can start to get into more back end stuff? Like, what kind of things did you start experimenting with, and what could new people now start applying to their work?
Yeah, I think for me personally, the biggest challenge was figuring out all the AWS specific services and what does what. So I would probably say that's step one. Like maybe potentially get a cert or talk to people to figure out, oh, S3 is for object storage, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think it's very powerful to have a visual builder, like what is now Application Composer, because with serverless, you have very many moving parts. And it's super helpful to see how they're tied together, even if it's just, one CloudFormation stack, but your production app is multiple stacks. I would say, yeah, definitely using stuff like Application Composer can be helpful because you're dragging and dropping, connecting things. And then you also have full access to the template. So you can just kind of periodically peek at the template that it's generating, and it becomes a lot less scary the more that you stare at it. That was my experience at Stackery, at least.
Yeah, for me, I think serverless came at like the perfect time. You know, I was just learning JavaScript. I had put a couple of things together just on something like Heroku, RIP Heroku, and I think that when I was starting, I really didn't know what an API was, but I knew like, oh, I have to have this S3 bucket here in order for me to get pictures, and I had to have this Dynamo thing here in order to get some data or whatnot. And putting all those services together at first was complex and confusing, but because of the framework, serverless framework in particular, and then diving into what CloudFormation is, it gave me more confidence that exactly like what I wanted to do and what it was doing were the same, and I can put that in version control. And like that's the story I've been trying to get out to as many people as possible about infrastructure as code. Like it's just a completely like better way to do things when you're trying to wrangle all of this cloud stuff, right? Um, and so I've been encouraging more JavaScript developers and engineers to think beyond, you know, their local container or even their deployed containers to try to use more of this quote like cloud native stuff. You know, so what kind of patterns or services or AWS like cloud native things have you been really excited about and building with over the last a year?
Yeah, I think another thing also that we haven't mentioned is also kind of the shift from thinking in a synchronous fashion to thinking in an asynchronous fashion.
Oh yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because at my current job, we're a healthcare startup, and we have a lot of data, and the data's all over the place, and it's messy because it's built on a system, that was created in the 90s. But because we are building on top of that with more modern things, such as, to answer your question, Event Bridge and step functions. That has really helped us a lot in terms of velocity and also with step functions in particular. I love the console and being able to debug, which state failed and why. It's very traceable.
Awesome, awesome. I love step functions as well. I remember when it first came out, it really was an answer to the never-ending problem of how do lambdas connect to one another, or how can we orchestrate these disparate functions. Sometimes we need to have things done, as you said, like asynchronously. And step functions as a service showed up and were able to give us some really interesting powers in terms of orchestrating these extra services. What have How have you found the step functions, the IAC part of it for you? Like, what kind of tips and tricks have you done to keep them kind of sane because it gets complicated really quickly?
Yeah, it definitely does. That was kind of my original detractor from like not wanting to start to use step functions, to be honest with you. So it's very relevant that you asked that question. Because of my personal bias towards visual drag and drop, when they released Step Functions Workflow Studio, that has helped me out a lot because you just drag and drop what you need, and then it outputs a an ASL file that you can use in CloudFormation, SAM. I think you can use it in CDK, although at my job, we use like the CDK library, but that can get kind of messy too. So, but yeah, generally, I love using the Workflow Studio. Like, even if I'm doing it in like the CDK language version, if I don't know what I'm doing, like I will peep at it in the console and drag on what I need and see the change, and then kind of half guess what it is in CDK, and then it like most of the time it works, which is great.
Yep, yep. That's a great approach. And I think for the folks that are listening that haven't built their own workflows to use these services yet, we as the industry, we always say like, oh, don't do click ops and like stay out of the console. But the console is still really important to use as a tool when you're coming up on trying a new service or figuring out what it actually does. You can log into the console, have an actual list of options to go through, and be kind of guided in building out the service first, and then you can go back and use tools like CDK and CloudFormation and really dig into the documentation to figure out how to encapsulate that as code for repeatable deployments. So I think that's a really good reminder to folks to not be afraid of the console. There's everything you can do in the console you can do through the API. I believe that's how they're doing it now. And I commend AWS sometimes for releasing things that also have like CloudFormation support and SDK support, so that we can encapsulate it all in code. So that's really cool. That brings us, I think, to how are you bringing kind of like the serverless lens to your current work now in the healthcare industry? You mentioned a little bit about data. Like, why don't you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first off, I work for a company called Ensimata. No one has ever heard of because we are building internal tools for a healthcare organization currently. And personally, I feel like I've hit the gold mine because I came in and they already had a lot of the serverless mindset. I think it's because of a lot of the early hires that they made. But yeah, I do add my extra expertise and knowledge from doing this for probably like 8 years at this point, which in serverless dog years, it's like more like 80. But um, yeah, just kind of seeing where a lot of our customers are having issues. It's really interesting working for end users that are not techies, like not dev tools. So we really always start a lot with, what does the company need? What are their pain points? We are building out new workflows for, like, how when you go to the doctor and a medical assistant comes in before the doctor and they ask you like a billion questions, like about your history and all that. We're building a better workflow UI for them, backed by serverless technology. And yeah, just kind of focusing more on like what business value can we add. We generally kind of start with that rather than oh, what services am I going to use? And that's what I love about serverless is it enables you to do that because you're not thinking about, oh, I got to buy a bunch of servers and then provision them, and then they might have a spike during this time. We got to configure auto scaling. Like, you don't really have to think about that in general, which I love.
That's awesome. So in your at your company, there's everybody's kind of already on board with serverless, and they're not as concerned over like which you know OS patch do we have to apply to these set of servers in order to, have a certain amount of uptime or all that, right?
Correct. Yeah. The one thing that we do still have is there is an on-premises database, and also an on-premises API that we use. But the wider company beyond like my little startup within this company, they already have it on their radar of like, let's move this to the cloud. And I think that's just going to accelerate things and make things better for our customers because things will be faster and more reliable and less engineers waking up in the middle of the night because something went down. And yeah,
Yep.
really excited for it.
That is cool. Yeah, I mean, even, we've been into the serverless field for 7, 8 years now, like you said. There are still just tons and tons of on-premises services still running, still rocking and rolling. There's really no reason to retire them other than, it's hard to maintain. They don't know, nobody is able to keep them running the way they used to, and that kind of thing. So, going back to your front end beginnings, and now you're doing all this awesome back end work. What was it about the cloud architectures and that tooling that made you want to focus more on them?
Yeah, I can only speak for myself, but I definitely found that disclaimer that I do know Docker now, but like just being fresh out of code school, like not really even understanding what a container, what an image is, like so much just jargon associated with Docker that I didn't understand. And like I generally just like fell asleep as I was trying to teach myself how to use it because I had to for my job. But I think with serverless, like I felt really energized because it seemed like the shift, at least initially, like long term, it's more than that. But like initially, my learning of and exposure to serverless, it kind of shifted the what I needed to learn was like, how do I deploy this rather than like, how does this thing work? So, like, my philosophy when I started getting into serverless was like, I was like, oh, this is very interesting. I'm very highly motivated. This is cool that it's like deployment first because coming from a customer service background, I want to ship things that people use. So that was kind of my main motivation. And then once I got over that hump, was when I, learned more about the intricacies of Lambda and SQS and definitely IAM. That is very important to learn for sure.
Yeah, I really loved how it also just sort of focused on getting the stuff done. It wasn't about configuring, you know, huge amounts of files or whatnot. You started with a template, had everything you need, and you just start writing your business logic and your functions. So that's cool that you naturally kind of progress through your curiosity and then your want of, providing better for your customers, right? In order, you were building forms, as we all do. Forms gotta have to happen, and then they go someplace, and then you get more itchy about, like, where does it go? How does it get there? How can we make it better? And then I think that leads us to, you were just minted a serverless hero, and I tell people all the time that I'm community taught, and I didn't really set out to be an expert on AWS, but here we are. Tell me about, your community experience, how you kind of came up, and who gave you encouragement, and how you got to be a serverless hero now.
Yeah, definitely thinking on that. I probably really got my start when I worked for Stackery because serverless was still pretty new. I alluded to this earlier, but like a lot of our job beyond building tooling was going out into the community, teaching people about serverless, asking people how they were using serverless so we could bring it back to improve on the product. And as an engineer, especially someone who comes from a customer support background, I was highly interested in, talking directly to folks. So that turned into me going to a lot of serverless conferences and meeting wonderful folks, folks like yourself, Paul. And yeah, it takes a village. I think, there's that kind of trope of the nerdy guy that just sits in the basement and knows how to code a lot. But the more that I'm in this industry, and this goes even beyond serverless, I feel like it really takes a village. Software is a team sport, and I would definitely not be where I am if it weren't for a lot of the folks that I've met through the serverless community, through the Community Builders program, through the Heroes program, and definitely forever grateful for all the people that are smarter than me that answered my silly questions, because that really meant a lot to me and really helped me progress a lot faster in my career than I would have if I were in a basement by myself. And now I feel really grateful that I'm to the point where being a hero, I can start to pay it back and help, those who come in behind me, just to make this a more welcoming, diverse community, because it better reflects the population of the customers that we serve and ultimately makes a better product. So,
Definitely. I love the community that serverless has from a couple of the conferences that I've been to, and it's pretty small group of folks that really see the potential in this technology and match up really good business goals with how we can use these tools, because ultimately we use these serverless tools in order to build cool projects and serve customers and actually do get things done. When you were first, becoming when you first became a serverless hero, what are some of the projects that really you had a lot of fun kind of putting out there and telling people about?
yeah, great question. I'm trying to think on that. I've been busy with the day job lately, so I've been creating less than I would like. Most recently, I started building this app called Small Talk that I want to get back to. But essentially, what it is it solves the problem of if you work in a remote environment and you get on a Zoom call with your coworkers in different locations, you need some sort of little small talk kind of icebreaker to start the meeting. So I set it up as a step function behind an API because I was interested in learning more about step functions. So it was kind of a double, something that was useful to me, but also I could learn more about step functions. And there's like different facets, something where like it grabs tech news. It also, you can enter in a location. So you enter in your coworker's location, and then you can kind of make comments about their weather. That was a lot of fun to build. And my next iteration is I want to add a front end to it and log in and make it a more functioning app just beyond like a bare bones CLI thing. So,
That is cool. We have this thing set up in Slack called Donut. I don't know if you've ever come across it before. It's like a little bot that will go through the Slack roster and then connect people randomly, almost, to have little like coffee chats with each other. It's called a donut meeting, and it has some icebreaker questions and kind of keeps track of that for us. It would be cool to have an even more detailed system to be able to have people connect, because we're all working remote these days. That's awesome. Because you were working on that and you were learning some of the step function stuff that you're able to apply to your regular day job, and that sounds like an experience that we all kind of go through. So with all the changes that come on, there's also complexity that doesn't stop. Even though serverless is easier in some aspects, it does have more complexity that we opt into, and that almost seems like too much for new people. So what are the areas that you're trying to keep up with? And tell me about sort of how you're staying up to date in cloud tech.
yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, Twitter slash X, whatever we're calling it now, that's pretty huge for me to kind of just see what people are talking about. I admit that I very much live in an AWS serverless bubble, so my feed is probably different than others. But beyond that, I would say there's a lot of really great serverless newsletters out there. like Jeremy Daly's Off by None. Alan Helton does a really good one. I think it's called Ready Set Cloud. Just kind of keeping up with that, like more passively, because it's a weekly email that comes to me, and then I can read the articles. That helps me out a lot. And also, I would say if you can afford to go to reInvent, definitely take advantage of that. And the reason why I say that is because reInvent is very expensive. So I acknowledge that not everyone has the privilege of being able to do that. But yeah, great workshops. I definitely want to do like a game day next year. Just tons of different ways to learn, just talking to people.
Any big announcements or news from reInvent that you liked this year?
I kind of liked, I was really expecting them to be, all over the place about AI, which they were, but it was a little less than I thought. Because in particular, Werner Vogel's big keynote, he talked a lot about the frugal architect and how you can save on costs and things like that. I think the more that I get into the industry, as someone who has the privilege of kind of already knowing stuff, I kind of like the more boring things, like S3 consistency updates. I think that was last year. It wasn't eventually consistent, it was something else. Um, but yeah, to more directly answer your question, I would say this year I'm most excited about Bedrock. That seems really cool. And then a close second place is my bias for Stackery, so Application Composer in as a VS Code extension, which was really exciting to me.
Awesome. Yeah, I also enjoy boring updates because it means that we're doing all right. Like S3 is like super rock solid, APIs rock solid. If it just gets even more consistent than it already is, that's a total win, you know? And I'm also glad that at reInvent, it wasn't the big AI in your face everything everywhere that a lot of other um, tech events have been around. Just like I just assume AI is in everything now. Like it's everywhere. I'm good with it. I'll learn how to use it as we go along, but it doesn't have to be like the end all be all. You know, we still need good, nice, boring services like S3 to actually get all the work done, which is awesome. All right, that sounds great. So, what we can do now is take a look at some of the cool stuff that maybe you're doing now, or do you have anything that you want to share with the listeners that's kind of an underrated serverless tool or places to check you out at?
Yeah, I have kind of a hot take and a opinionated share, if you don't
Oh,
mind.
yeah, love the hot takes.
Some folks might disagree with me on this, but I feel like, talking more about like front end developers and like making that shift to back end and, what stops them from getting into serverless. And I feel like this also applies to like people that have been in the industry for super long. They've seen some stuff way smarter than me for sure. But one thing that I've noticed is a lot of times people will be like, yeah, I've tried serverless. I can't use it because the cold start latency is too bad. And I guess my kind of share slash hot take is I feel like cold starts are focused on a little bit too much. There are definitely like super, super niche reasons why a cold start would negatively impact your application, where you can't use it. But I feel like people harp on it a lot more than they should. And one thing that's kind of like inspired me lately has been this wasn't last year at reInvent, but like 2 years ago was the release of Java Snap Start. So if you're using Java on Lambda, it's way faster now. If you're someone that's tried serverless but can't use it because of the cold starts, I would probably highly encourage you to give it another shot because that's one of the beauties of serverless is we just wake up and there's a new AWS blog post about something being faster or more efficient, and we didn't have to do a single thing to improve it.
That is the hot take, that cold starts really aren't as big a deal as you think they are. Um, People who come across them, there's ways. First, cold starts are just like the size of your function, like how much stuff is in your function. Like, why do you have all this stuff? I'm not a huge fan of like the lambda lith kind of take on it, where people are basically putting an entire express server like shoved in a lambda just to get it running and working. uh Gives me a bit of the ick, so I'm with you there. All right, cool. So the next question is, as a serverless hero, Danielle, if you could have a superhuman power, what would it be?
Oh man. Yeah, this is a good one. I feel like I would love the ability to predict the future. It might spoil the fun of some stuff, but it could be very helpful just in general.
Okay, with oracle powers, then I would follow up with, what time frame of the future can you predict? Is it like 3 minutes into the future, 100 years? What would you pick?
I think I would probably say maybe like 5 years into the future, because that's like enough to get like high level trends and like, what you should be clinging to versus what's just noise.
Yep. Yep. I feel like you already have that superpower. You were working in front end, you saw the writing on the wall, you knew you wanted to get more into the back end technologies, you saw an opportunity to just shift and take over, you know, more of the deployable responsibilities and the freedoms that it gave you. I think you already have that superpower then.
Well, thank you for that.
All right. Well, did you want to give any final shout outs or thoughts to our listeners?
Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't say, if you haven't checked out Application Composer, definitely check it out. I'm biased, but it's a fantastic way to get started with serverless, just being able to have those drag and drop resources. And I think along the lines of that is we got this feedback at Stackery as well. There were a lot of complaints about, oh, well, why doesn't it compile to, my preferred infrastructure of code as a choice? Like, why doesn't it do Terraform? Why doesn't it do CDK? And I think I would challenge your listeners to think beyond infrastructure as code. I would love to see things like Application Composer become like the thing that we use, where we don't even have to write infrastructure as code and we can just even further focus on what matters to the customers.
Yeah. That's a good final message. Application Composer is something that I actually haven't played with yet. So I think after we get off our call today, I'm definitely going to go check it out. Maybe able to write up a cool blog post about it. And also, it's kind of a shout out to Amped and kind of what Jeremy Daly's doing with his new venture, where you write code and infrastructure just sort of happens behind it.
Yeah, that's very exciting to me as well. And being able to, easily translate from compute types, go from Lambda to App Runner or, another container based thing. That's also really exciting to me.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks again to Danielle for joining us today. Be sure to give her a follow. She's a serverless hero. She's doing all kinds of great things. She's giving back to the community. Definitely has some really awesome hot takes. So follow her on Twitter and also follow Serverless Guru. Be sure to rate this podcast if you like it. If you didn't like it, leave a comment telling me why you didn't like it and still rate it. But until next time, I'm Paul Chin Jr., and keep on talking serverless.